The smell of braised short ribs filled the house the way it always did on Christmas Eve, and for a second, standing at the stove with the snow piling up against the back window, I almost let myself believe this was a home. 2 years I'd been making that believing into a full-time job. 2 years since I'd let my husband talk me out of my position at the architecture firm in Calgary, where I'd been on track to lead my own studio before I turned 32. "We don't need the second income," he'd said. "And Mom isn't getting younger, and wouldn't it be nice to actually be present for once?" Present. That was the word he used, like I'd been some kind of ghost haunting our own marriage. I stirred the gravy and listened to them in the dining room. My mother-in-law's voice came through the wall like a draft you can't find the source of. "The tortilla crust is too pale, isn't it? My mother always said a proper crust should be the color of a chestnut." She didn't say it to me. She said it to the room, which was worse, because it meant I was supposed to overhear and correct myself without being told. "It's a butter crust," I called back, keeping my voice even. "It browns slower. It'll be fine." "If you say so, dear." If you say so. I had learned to hear the knife inside those 4 words. My husband's name was Theo. No, I won't even give him that. I'll just call him my husband because that's all he turned out to be. A role, a title, a coat I'd hung my whole self on. He came into the kitchen then, smelling of his father's rye and the cologne I used to buy him before I learned he'd started buying a different one himself. He didn't meet my eyes. He'd been not meeting my eyes for about 3 weeks, and I told myself it was the stress of the holidays, the year-end at his family's development company, the usual December tightness in his jaw. "Smells good," he said, opening the fridge for a soda water he didn't drink. "That's the idea. Mom wants the good cranberry, the one with the orange." "It's already made." "Right. Of course it is." He said it like it was a flaw in me, the way I had everything ready. He drifted back out before I could decide whether to throw the wooden spoon at the back of his head. "I want to tell you about the people at that table because you should know who I was performing for." There was his mother, who I'd spent 8 Christmases trying to win over, who had never once said thank you without making it sound like a verdict. There was his father, a quiet man who drank his rye and mostly looked at the snow, and who, every so often, would say something kind to me in a low voice when no one else could hear, as though kindness were contraband in that house. There was my husband's sister, who had married into oil money out in Fort McMurray and came home each December smelling of duty-free perfume and condescension. Her husband, who I genuinely could not pick out of a lineup despite knowing him for years because he never said anything that wasn't about his truck or his boat. And then there was me, the keeper of preferences. I knew that his mother took her tea steeped exactly 4 minutes, no more, with 1/2 spoon of honey. I knew his father liked his rye neat with a single ice cube he'd pretend he didn't want. I knew his sister drank her wine like it had personally wronged her. I knew all of it, the whole catalog, and not one of them knew how I took my coffee. My phone buzzed on the counter. My best friend from my old firm. I'll call her my friend because what she did that night earns her more than a name in a story about people who failed me. "How's the gulag?" she texted. "Say the word and I'll fake a frozen pipe emergency and come extract you." I smiled, the first real one all day, and typed back, "Standing by. The crust has been declared a war crime." We sat down at 7. His mother had insisted on the heirloom dishes, the ones I had to hand wash in scalding water afterward with my heart in my throat, terrified of chipping a single gold rim. The candles were lit. The tourtière looked beautiful. The crust, the exact color it was supposed to be, and for about 3 minutes. I timed it, looking back. It was almost lovely. The clink of cutlery, the low murmur, the snow falling outside in that particular hush that makes Alberta in December feel like the inside of a snow globe. Then his sister set down her fork. "So," she said, in the voice she used when she was about to draw blood, "I ran into Bryn Castellano at the club last week. You remember her, don't you? She just made principal at the firm. She was asking after you. You two started around the same time, didn't you?" I felt the whole table turn toward me, His mother's eyes sharpened with interest. We did, I said, smoothing my napkin. I'm happy for her. She's just done the most gorgeous renovation on a place in Canmore. Second home, of course. A delicate bite. It must be so freeing having your own thing, your own identity. You have no identity, you are his wife. That's all. The subtext landed like a brick through a window. A woman should have something of her own, his mother added, sipping her perfectly steeped tea. Something to fall back on. Don't you ever get restless, dear, all day in this house? Restless. I managed our entire financial life. I'd quietly rebalanced the investments my husband couldn't be bothered to look at, the ones that had outperformed his own family's fund 3 years running. I'd done the market analysis that landed his company the Edmonton waterfront contract, the one he'd presented to his father as his own brilliant pivot, the one that got his name on the boardroom wall. I'd planned the gala that raised $40,000 for the children's hospital, the one the local paper credited to the Whitlock family. I kept busy. God, I kept busy. I keep busy, I said. I'm sure you do. She made it sound like soap operas and bonbons. I got up to bring out dessert. The bûcher de Noël I'd spent 2 hours on, the sugar pie my own grandmother used to make, the maple whipped cream, and as I set them down, my husband tapped his knife against his water glass. Ting! 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 The conversation died. His father looked up, confused. His mother straightened, a small, curious smile playing at her mouth. His sister leaned forward, eyes bright. And in that half-second I understood something cold and total. They knew. Whatever was coming, they all already knew, and I was the only one at that table who didn't. He stood, his chair scraping the hardwood. I have something I need to say. Don't, I said very quietly. The word disappeared under the silence. He addressed his parents, his sister, not me. I know tonight's supposed to be about family, and I am grateful for this family. But sometimes things just don't work the way you planned them. He finally looked at me, and his eyes weren't sad or guilty. They were resolved. Cold. Rehearsed. I think we both know this marriage has run its course. I've had a lawyer draw up the papers. The room tilted. The candles smeared into long gold streaks. What? It came out of me as barely a breath. It's for the best. He said it the way you'd announce a change to the ski trip dates. He reached into the jacket hanging on his chair and pulled out a long envelope, whopped around the table, and set it down next to my untouched slice of sugar pie. My lawyer will call you after the holidays. It's a clean split. I think you'll find it more than fair. His sister actually pressed a hand to her chest. Oh, we're so sorry, but you're so brave. It takes courage to be honest about these things. The look she gave me was pure venom dressed up as pity. People just grow apart. And that was what did it, not him, her. The pressure that had been building behind my ribs for 3 weeks didn't break into tears. It crystallized into something clear and cold and very, very calm. I stood up. I walked to the counter and set down the serving knife I was still holding. I untied the apron his mother had given me 2 Christmases ago, a not very subtle comment on my role, monogrammed with the family initial, never mine. I folded it once, neatly, and laid it on the stool. Don't be dramatic, my husband said, a flicker of irritation. He braced for crying, for pleading. He hadn't planned for this quiet. I ignored him. I looked at his mother, who was watching me the way you'd watch a lab animal that is finally turned and bitten. You've always had so much to say about my cooking, I said, and my voice carried clear across that silent room. The crust's too pale, the cranberries wrong, the tueries too dry. I picked up my purse from the hall table. Well, here's some good news. You won't have to suffer through any of it again. You can have his new wife make Christmas dinner next year. I'm sure she'll follow your mother's recipes to the letter. I watched the color drain right out of her face. You knew I saw it. You all knew he was leaving me. You just didn't think you'd have to sit here and watch it happen. Wait, my husband said, taking a step toward me. The term's art, you can't just. You and I both know they're not fair. I had my hand on the front door. I didn't raise my voice once. My lawyer will be in touch with my terms. I opened the door and the cold came in off the prairie like a slap, like a baptism, 20 below and clean as anything. You can't just leave, his sister called after me, shrill now. I turned and gave her a small, icy smile. Watch me. I closed the door softly behind me. My hands weren't even shaking. I got into my car, started it, let it warm a moment while my phone lit up in my purse. Missed call, missed call, missed call. And then I backed out of the driveway of the house I'd renovated, past the spruce I'd planted, and drove out into the snow with no destination and, for the first time in 2 years, a direction, away. I didn't go far. I pulled into the lot of a Tim Hortons off the highway, the only thing open, and sat in the orange glow of it with a double-double going cold in the cup holder, and I called my friend. How's the... He did it. My voice cracked for the first time. At the table, with everyone watching, he handed me an envelope. There was a beat of silence. Then, very steady, "Where are you? Don't drive on these roads upset. I'm putting boots on." "I'm fine to drive. I'm at the Timmy's on Crowchild." "Come here. I'm opening the wine. And on the way, I want you to think about whether you still have your friend from the Schulich days, the one who went into family law downtown, because you are not signing anything that man hands you." Her name surfaced through the fog like a porch light. She was right. There was someone. We'd kept in touch the lazy way old classmates do, birthday texts and the occasional like on a post. She was a partner now at a litigation firm downtown, and she was, by every account, a shark. I sat in that parking lot and I called her. It was Christmas Eve. I expected voicemail. She picked up on the third ring. "Well, this is a surprise. Merry Christmas, stranger. I'm so sorry to call you tonight." "Don't be sorry. Just talk. What's wrong?" Her tone shifted the instant she heard mine. I told her. The dinner. The toast. The envelope. The fact that he'd said he'd already started moving things out. That I had until the end of the month. She listened without one interruption, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice had steel under the warmth. "Okay, listen to me carefully. Do not speak to his lawyer. Not after the holidays, not ever unless I'm on the line. Do not sign anything. Do not even open that envelope. Have you opened it?" "No, I left it on the table." "Good. Leave it. Now, where are your important documents? Your passport, your birth certificate, your bank records, anything in your name?" My mind, which usually held everything, went blank. At the house, in the office. "Then here's what we're doing tonight. You do not go alone. You take your friend or someone big and calm. You go back, you photograph every room before you touch a thing, and you take what is yours, your passport, your jewelry, your documents, any record of money. You take pictures of what's missing too. Then you leave and you stay somewhere that isn't that house. Can you do that?" "Yes," I said, and the calm came back, and this time it felt like something I could use. Not peace, focus. "One more thing. He said he's moved things out. People who move out before a Christmas Eve ambush have usually moved out the things that matter to them. Go look at what he left and pay close attention to what he took." My friend met me at the house 20 minutes later in her husband's truck, a tire iron sitting in the footwell that she swore was just in case the gate's frozen. The windows of my floor were dark except for one. We went up. My key still worked. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not the soft quiet of the morning, but a hollowed-out emptiness. The second thing was the gaps. His grandfather's chair, gone. The shelf where he kept his keys, bare. His side of the closet, stripped to naked hangers. My side, untouched, like a museum exhibit of the wife he'd decided to retire. But on my dresser, where my mother's velvet jewelry box should have been, there was a cheaper box I didn't recognize. My hands were steady as I opened it. Inside were the things he'd left me. the silver studs I wore to the gym, a beaded bracelet from a craft fair. Gone were my grandmother's sapphire ring, my mother's pearl strand, the diamond drops I'd bought myself with my first real bonus. He'd taken the valuables and left me the sentimental scraps. "That's theft," my friend whispered. "Call the police." "Not yet," she said. "Document first." I started photographing everything: the empty closet, the swapped box, the gaps on the shelves. I went into the office. The filing cabinet where we kept passports and tax records sat slightly open. My passport, gone. The folder with my name on it, gone. The papers for the cabin my mother had left me on the lake near Sylvan, up in the trees where she and I had spent every summer of my childhood, gone. But he'd been sloppy. The small fireproof box where I kept the original deed and my mother's will was tucked behind a panel in the bottom drawer, somewhere he either didn't know about or didn't have time for. I opened it. They were there. I held them to my chest like a heartbeat. And then I saw the wastebasket by the desk. Not the usual day's garbage. It was full of torn paper, thick linen stock, shredded by hand into ribbons. I knelt and pulled out a fistful. "I need a garbage bag," I said. "What? Why?" "Because he shredded something. A lot of somethings." We spread a bedsheet on the office floor and pieced it together like the world's grimmest jigsaw, and slowly a picture surfaced. Not our personal finances, but the company's. Spreadsheets with columns bleeding red, memos with words like liquidity and bridge financing and collateral, and one fragment, nearly whole, that turned my blood to ice. An email from his father to him. Subject line, Q4, the lake solution. I smoothed the pieces flat. The cabin is the only unencumbered asset of real value in her name. The Edmonton refinance fell through. If we can't secure the line of credit before year-end, we're looking at insolvency. The Sylvan property appraised at $680K, free and clear. That's the leverage we need. You have to expedite your situation. Timelines moved up. We need this settled before the bank reviews the file in January. Do what you have to do. The cabin. My mother's cabin. The one in my name, inherited clean. The one he'd called our little nest egg. The one he'd been so gently pushing me for 2 years to put into a joint account just for simplicity. I sat back on my heels with the paper scattered around me, and the whole thing reassembled itself in my head, not on the floor, but in my chest. It was never about another woman. It was never about being unhappy. It was a fire sale, and I was the asset that needed to be liquidated fast and cheap. The public ambush, the rush, the envelope. He needed me reeling, emotional, desperate enough to sign anything just to make it stop. He'd been counting on the accommodating wife, the one who smoothed things over. He'd underestimated me. My phone lit up on the floor. A text. "This is getting ridiculous. Pick up. We need to talk like adults. My lawyer will call you the 27th. Be reasonable. You'll be taken care of." I didn't answer him. I photographed the reconstructed email, sent it to my lawyer, and signed the retainer she emailed me with a furious swipe of my finger. "Got it," she wrote back within minutes. "Don't respond to him. Get out of there. We start at dawn. And don't lose a single one of those threads. I want them bagged and dated." I gathered my mother's documents and the bag of paper. "Let's go," I said. "You don't want clothes? Your things?" I looked around the beautiful cold apartment, the stage set for a life that had been a performance the whole time. "There's nothing here I need." I pulled the door shut and took one last photo, the envelope still sitting unopened beside my cold slice of sugar pie. The cabin was a world away from the city. It smelled of wood smoke and cold pine instead of money and polish, and I sat at the wobbly table where my mother and I had shelled peas 100 summers ago, and across from me, on the laptop screen, sat my lawyer with the downtown skyline gray behind her. "Open his," she said. "Let's see what we're dealing with." I slip a letter opener under the flap. The papers were crisp, expensive, smelling of legal menace. I read and my breath caught. He's requesting exclusive possession of the home pending sale. He's listing my voluntary withdrawal from the workforce and lack of financial contribution as grounds to deny spousal support. He's offering a one-time settlement of $40,000 in lieu of any division of property, citing the short marriage and my non-contribution. My voice was shaking, but with fury, white and total. And he's claiming the cabin as a family asset because it was maintained with marital funds and should be sold to clear joint debts. Debts I never knew existed. The silence on her end was dangerous. He's not just trying to take you for a ride, he's trying to erase you. He's claiming you contributed nothing, that you're a dependent rather than a partner, and he's coming for your inheritance to bail out a business that's drowning. That cabin is your safety net, and they need it. Okay, open mine. The document she drafted overnight was 3 times thicker. It petitioned on the grounds of his conduct. It demanded interim and ongoing support, citing my 8-year marriage and the career I'd abandoned at his explicit demand. It claimed the matrimonial home, the investment portfolio, and, critically, a share of the increased value of his family's company during our marriage. "You're going after the company?" I whispered. "You told me you did the analysis that won the Edmonton contract. You managed the household investments that beat their own fund. You were an unpaid analyst and strategist for 8 years. In this province, that kind of indirect contribution to the growth of a business is on the table. It's a harder swing. But with the emails, and we have the emails, it's the swing that makes them sweat. It gets their attention, and attention is leverage." 2 days later, I sat in a fluorescent-lit courtroom for the interim hearing while my husband sat at the next table with his lawyer, a smooth, older man in a suit that cost more than my first car. My husband wouldn't look at me. He stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, and for the first time he looked tired. My lawyer was a pit bull in a tailored blazer. She laid out the ambush, the stripped closet, the stolen jewelry and passport, the threats to my separate property. His lawyer oozed reasonableness, amicable dissolution, generous offer, a spouse who hasn't held a job in years. "She hasn't held a paid job," my lawyer said, not even sitting down. "Her unpaid labor managing this family's finances let my client's husband focus entirely on the family business. Her unpaid analysis won that business its most profitable contract in 5 years. We have the email chain. We have his reply. Send me a memo I can forward to Dad." She set the papers on the clerk's desk. I'd spent 36 hours reconstructing them from my old laptop. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman who clearly had no patience for theater, looked over the glasses at my husband. "Are you claiming sole credit for the Edmonton contract?" "I led the team, Your Honor. My wife offered some informal thoughts." "Informal thoughts you formatted into a memo and presented as your own." His lawyer scrambled, but the damage was done. The judge ruled fast. I was granted exclusive use of the home. He was ordered to return my passport and the listed jewelry within 48 hours, and he was ordered to pay interim spousal support of $4,200 a month pending trial. His head snapped toward me, his eyes blazing with a hatred so pure it took my breath. I met it with a calm mask. The cold focus inside me held steady as a blade. In the hallway after, he broke from his lawyer and came at me. My lawyer stepped half in front. "This is a mistake," he hissed, low. "You're playing a game you can't win. Drop the business claim, take the settlement, walk away. You'll be sorry if you don't." "Are you threatening my client?" my lawyer asked, loud enough for the lingering crowd. He ignored her. "You have no idea what you're stirring up. Stop." "The only thing I'm stopping," I said, quiet and clear, "is you stealing my mother's cabin. Return my grandmother's ring by tomorrow, or we're back in front of that judge." And I turned and walked away, and my hands were trembling, but not from fear, from the adrenaline of a small war won. The high faded by the time I got back to the cabin, and I was sitting there scrolling job listings with my stomach in a knot over my shrinking savings when my phone rang, a city number I didn't know. It was my old principal from the firm, The formidable woman who'd run the Calgary office, who I'd assumed had forgotten me the day I left. "I heard a rumor," she said, with no patience for hello. "I heard your husband did something unforgivable, and I heard you're available again, professionally. Please tell me the second part is true." I actually laughed, a short startled sound. "It's true." "Good, because I have a problem. The Riverstone mixed-use project, the one downtown. My lead just walked, the client's furious, and the design is a disaster 6 weeks out from the development permit. I need someone who isn't scared of a mess, who can think on her feet, who understands that good design isn't about showing off. I thought of you. I was an idiot to let you go." A pause. "It's a contract to start. Salary's double what you were making when you left, with a signing bonus to get you back on your feet. Pull it off and it's permanent, with an associate title. What do you say?" I thought of his sneer. "You haven't held a job in years." I thought of the judge's first skeptical glance. I thought of the legal bills stacked against me. "When do I start?" "Monday, 8 a.m. Bring the version of you that scared people." I hung up, and the snow was coming down outside the cabin window, and I felt, for the first time in 2 years, like a person with a future instead of a sentence. I won't pretend the months after were tidy. They were depositions and discovery, and a forensic accountant the court appointed to crawl through the company's books, a process that moved like cold molasses but that froze their line of credit while it churned. There were threatening texts from his sister, from a burner number I knew he used for his golf trips. "Keep digging and you won't like what you find. Some holes are too deep to climb out of." The old fear tried to crawl back in. Instead, I opened my laptop and emailed an old classmate who'd gone into journalism, who covered corporate fraud now for one of the national papers, and asked if he wanted to grab a coffee about a story. Off the record, for now. I hit send, and the blade inside me felt sharper than it had in years. They wanted a war. They were about to learn that the wife they'd written off wasn't a homemaker with a lawyer. She was a strategist who had just found her battlefield. The Riverstone launch landed hard and clean, and the client who'd been ready to walk instead signed for 2 more phases. They made me an associate before the snow melted. The forensic accountant found the thing they'd been so frantic to hide. Money pulled out of a client trust account, routed through a numbered company, landing somewhere it shouldn't have. The journalist found the rest, the failed refinance, the lender with a reputation that made banks nervous. It was never just a struggling business. It was a house of cards built on other people's money. The story ran on the Tuesday. And that, finally, was when the calling started, the thing the title of my whole ordeal might as well have been. His sister first, the panic stripping the condescension right out of her voice. "Daddy's having chest pains. The bank is calling the notes because of your lawsuit. You have to drop it. We're family." I was hosting a dinner when she called, not a Christmas dinner, just a regular January Sunday with the people who'd actually shown up for me. My friend with the wine, my lawyer, who'd become more than a lawyer somewhere around the 3rd hearing, a steady, quiet presence who'd seen me at my most shattered and never once flinched, the journalist. A couple of new colleagues from the firm. I put her on speaker because by then I'd learned the value of witnesses. "We were never family," I told her, while the soup went cold and the whole table listened. "You sat at that table and smirked while your brother handed me divorce papers over dessert. You spent 8 years treating me like the help. And now that he's bankrupt and your father's empire is collapsing under its own fraud, you're calling me for mercy." I let it land. "No, you are my captors. I've just been granted parole." She was still crying when I hung up. The trial, when it finally came that spring, was its own long story. The forensic accountant laying out the shell game in flat clinical detail, my old principal testifying that losing me had been a genuine blow to the firm and the bombshell I never saw coming. His father's longtime assistant taking the stand and quietly admitting she'd overheard the 2 of them, months before that Christmas, planning the whole thing. Shock her. Serve her in front of everyone. Get her to sign before she gets a lawyer. Use the girlfriend. It'll look like he just moved on. The courtroom went so still you could hear the heating tick. The judge set aside his lowball offer entirely. She granted me half the equity in the home. She awarded me a share of the marital growth in the company, diminished now, but the principal was everything. She confirmed the cabin as mine, free and clear, beyond the reach of him or any creditor he tried to hide behind. She ordered him to repay the value of every piece of jewelry he'd taken. And because of how he'd done all of it, she ordered him to pay my legal fees down to the last dollar. He looked like he'd been struck. His father sat with his head bowed. His mother wept silent, furious tears. And when he finally met my eyes across that courtroom, there was no hatred left in him. Just a hollow, exhausted defeat. I felt no triumph, only a deep, tired relief, like setting down something I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it had weight. A year after that, on a Sunday in December, I hosted again. At the cabin this time, the wobbly table dragged into the center of the room and crowded with people. My friend, who'd put on boots in a blizzard for me. The man who'd been my lawyer and was now, quietly and completely, just mine. New colleagues, an old mentor. The journalist arguing happily with someone about hockey. No head of the table. No heirloom dishes. I'd be terrified to chip. Just mismatched plates and too much food and a noise in the room that had nothing performed about it. I'd started something that year, a small fund, run out of a borrowed office that helped women get legal advice when they were leaving marriages where the money had been used as a cage. The first woman we helped had called me from a parking lot, the way I once had, her voice shaking, and a few weeks later she'd texted me a photo of her own new kitchen, her own new key. I keep that photo. It's the only thing that ever made the whole nightmare feel like it had meant something. The short ribs were perfect, not that it mattered. The meal could have been burnt toast and it would have been the best meal of my life, because it was mine. Outside, the snow came down over the lake the way it had every winter of my childhood, soft and total and unbothered by any of us. The ghost of the woman in the monogrammed apron, basting a roast for people who despised her, was just that now. A ghost, a memory of a life that had never really been mine to begin with. Someone raised a glass, I don't even remember who, and I looked around that crowded, ordinary, beautiful table and I thought about how the best revenge had turned out not to be the courtroom or the headline or his face when the verdict came down, but this, a quiet so full it had nothing to do with emptiness. I lifted my own glass and outside the snow kept falling, and for the first time in a very long time I wasn't bracing for anything at all. For a long time I thought the worst thing that happened to me that Christmas was the envelope beside my sugar pie. It wasn't. The worst thing was how close I came to signing it. I'd spent 2 years being trained to keep the peace, to soften every sharp edge in that house, and the man I married was counting on exactly that. On the accommodating wife who'd rather lose everything than make a scene. That was the whole plan. Shock me, rush me, surround me with witnesses, and let my own politeness do the rest. The cruelty of it was almost elegant, and it nearly worked. What saved me wasn't luck. I want to be honest about that because it matters. It wasn't a friend who happened to be a lawyer or a reporter who fell out of the sky. It was the slow, unglamorous habit of paying attention. I'd kept records nobody asked me to keep. I'd held on to the original deed to my mother's cabin instead of folding it into a joint account. For simplicity, the way I'd been pushed to. When my lawyer told me to photograph every room before I touched a thing, I did it without arguing, even with my hands shaking. None of that was dramatic. All of it was decisive. The lesson I'd give my younger self isn't be suspicious of everyone. It's know your own affairs as well as you know everyone else's tea order. I'd memorized how my mother-in-law took her honey and forgotten to protect myself. Never again. The other thing I learned is that walking away from a table where you're treated as the help is not weakness, and staying is not loyalty. For years, I called my silence patience. It wasn't. It was fear wearing patience's coat. Real strength turned out to be quieter than I expected. It looked like a steady voice in a fluorescent courtroom, a retainer signed at a wobbly kitchen table, A no, said plainly to a sister-in-law begging me to bury the truth so her father could keep his good name. I didn't raise my voice once. I just stopped flinching. And here's the part I hold on to. The cause of their ruin wasn't me. I didn't burn that family down out of spite. I simply stopped holding up a wall that was already rotting from the inside. They built a house on other people's money and called it a legacy, and when it fell, they wanted me to crawl back under it. The kindest thing I ever did for myself was let it fall. If you take anything from my mess, let it be this. Be the kind of person who does the right thing even when no one's watching, because your character is the only asset they can't shred. Learn how your own life actually works. The money, the documents, the contracts, so no one can convince you that you contributed nothing. And when the moment comes to choose between comfortable and free, find the nerve to choose free, even at 20 below, even with no clothes packed and no plan. Especially then. I built my own table in the end. I'd rather eat burnt toast at it than another perfect meal at theirs.